Hey, friends, welcome to episode 583 of the My 123 Cents podcast. I am Kevin Huntsberger, joined once again this week by Chad Smart. And Chad, how are things going in California? Here in Southern Illinois, it is, as they say back in the day, colder than a witch's titty and a cast iron bra. So, what are you experiencing where you're at?
Uh, it is a nice, balmy, I don't know, it's probably in the 60s right now, but it's been in the 70s and low 80s
Oh,
for the
wow.
past week. Yeah. But then it gets down to like 50 at night and in the
Oh,
morning, and it's like too cold. But yeah, you got to kind of dress in layers to figure out
yeah.
what's going on. But no, it's going well. Um, yeah. I mean, there's not
Awkward
much going
pause.
on. What's that?
I said insert awkward pause here.
Yeah. I had a Facebook memory come up from like 4 years ago when I was in the Midwest, and there was a blanket of snow. And I said, that's why I took that photo, to remind me what the Midwest is like at this time and why I don't go back.
How cold does it typically get in Southern California? Like not extreme, but like just a usual winter in Southern California.
I mean, overnight, we'll get into the high 40s,
Okay.
maybe a little bit lower. I don't know. I don't,
Typically not
you know,
below freezing though.
typically not. No. I mean, unless you go up in the mountains or maybe way out in the desert, like
So do
Death
you even
Valley.
own a winter coat?
Oh, yeah. Because if it gets below 55, like I said, I got a fire going in the living room and turn the heater on when I get in the car.
You're
It's
one of
all
those.
about perspective.
That's true. That is true. 55 in January. We're rolling around in shorts and short sleeves here, but 55 in June, like you said, we're wearing
Oh, yeah,
hoodies, and sitting by a bonfire or something. So,
exactly.
well, enough weather talk. Let's jump into some wrestling, if you will. Um, I'll be honest, I did not watch the debut of TNA on AMC. And help me here, are they calling it TNA Impact still? Because it went from Access TV, which I guess was losing some of its market share on basic cable and
Hmm.
the
It
AMC.
had market share.
Right, exactly. Uh, how active had you been with TNA prior to? Because honestly, I moved to Southern Illinois in 2004.
Mhm.
I heard of TNA, but I had not watched any of it. And this was back before, the internet was around, but social media, you weren't getting clips and all of that good stuff. There was no YouTube or anything
Mhm.
back in those days. Kids perish the thought. But, by 2004, I moved to Southern Illinois and you were getting the weekly pay-per-views on Wednesday nights. And so I went over and watched many of those. Never
Mhm.
made the trip with you down to Nashville for a show, but I enjoyed it. It was an alternative to WWE, obviously. Even though I think TNA for the last 20 plus years has kind of still been pegged as WWE light in some cases. We can debate if that's a proper moniker now, but had you been watching from day one on TNA?
Yes, originally with the weekly, I think the only weekly shows that I didn't get were the recaps around the holidays. They would do like
Mhm.
a, year in review type show. And I'm like, well, I've already got 50 other tapes of these matches I can watch. So, but yeah, I watched, and then I think for the first year at least, I would do the monthly pay-per-view as well.
Mhm. So when you were doing because the weeklies were $10 a week, right?
Yeah.
Did they give you a deal if you like bought if you committed to doing a year's worth
You
or 6 months worth?
No, they didn't offer like any type of discount from what I can remember, but they did offer like if you signed up with through TNA and then sent like your satellite or cable bill in, they
Mhm.
would give you like I got a free history of TNA VHS signed by Jeff Jarrett.
Okay.
And I think there may have been like one or two other things that they gave out before they ended that program.
So I know like listening to the Conrad series of podcasts, he does one with Double J, but he does one with Eric Bischoff too. And Eric Bischoff says that he used a formula of, when it came to creating Nitro and going up against WWE, you can be better than, different than, or less than the competitor. And his approach with Nitro was different than. And I think that's fair to say the TNA approach was the same as that, is being different than as far as not trying to go head to head right away. And I know eventually they got
Yeah.
there, that Monday night blip that they tried. But, obviously, I feel like most people who listen or watch this podcast know that I'm WWE tried and true. You are WWE, but not like for life, so to speak. You like it, you watch it, you live it,
For the most part,
whatever,
yeah.
but it's not your number one pick.
Right.
So did you choose to watch TNA and do the pay-per-view thing back at that time because it was something different and outside of the box? And tell me about what you thought about the whole buying experience because, yeah, I could watch Raw or SmackDown on, basic cable, or back in the day you could watch SmackDown on free TV. So
Mhm.
what was it about TNA that made you commit to doing $40 a month? That's what
Yeah.
is that $480 a
$80 a
year?
year. Yeah.
I'm doing quick math here, so look at
Very good.
that's a big commitment for a wrestling fan, I think.
Yeah, I was younger and dumber. Um, and I also have poor spending habits when it comes to wrestling. Um, that's why I'm surprised I have not bought a WrestleMania ticket yet, but don't tempt me. No, from the moment that TNA sent out their first press release announcing the formation of the company, I was it. Like some of the names that they had listed, I'm like, okay, I will support this. And I think it is because, like you said, I pay attention to WWE and I'll have it on, but I don't. They have never been my number one promotion.
Uh-huh.
We've talked about it.
Yeah.
Growing up, I was Mid South, and then JCP, and then World Class, and then WWE.
Hmm.
Um, and then when ECW came around, and I discovered that it was ECW, WCW, WWE. Um, so for me, I think I just wanted something different. And you mentioned different than, less than, or better than, and in in marketing and promotion, I don't know if you've heard this, but when you're dealing with clients, you offer them three choices, and you say you can have two of these. It can be cheap, fast, or good. You can get cheap and fast, but it's not going to be good. You can get cheap and
I've
good, but
been
it's
some
not.
ladies like that.
Well, the Roselli sisters, I'm sure.
Yes.
And I think TNA was different than and less than WWE. I think they were different because they focused on the X division. They had somewhat of a focus more on tag team wrestling and a younger star, but they were less than because they also focused on ex WWF, WWE, WCW characters. They put Jeff Jarrett as the center of attention, the owner of the company, which I get. He's the guy that seemingly is going to be there every week until, later on, I guess, when the company got sold to the Panda. Um, but yeah,
Not
I
the
think
panda, but a different panda.
Panda in you, yes. Um, yeah, it was just something different. And again, I didn't have anything going on Wednesday nights. And I like the fact that there was commercial free
Mhm.
wrestling, you know?
This is turning into a conversation that I want to carry on and continue. So
Yeah.
we talked about earlier. Let's focus on this because I'm intrigued by this from
I
your
want to go back to the weather. Let's get back to the,
yeah. So, spoiler alert, we were going to just throw out some old Royal Rumble memories, which, we can do that anytime. But I'm interested though, from your perspective again. Like I said, I had heard of TNA, but I wasn't watching. This was when, my two oldest kids were just tiny. They were born in 2000 and 2001. So TNA comes around, I guess, in 2002. We actually, full disclosure, I was working in a very small, very, very small TV market, smaller than Southern Illinois, if you can imagine that. And I didn't make a lot of money, and my wife was staying at home with the kids and watching a couple of other kids. So one of the first cuts we made was to cable. So I wasn't even watching Raw or SmackDown back then. Sometimes I would go up to the TV station where I worked because they had cable there, and I would watch, you know, a couple of segments or whatever if I had to do some work or whatever. So anyway, uh, my wrestling fandom never waned because I was still reading and keeping up with things on uh, the internet. And then back then, you went to WWF.com or WWE. I guess it was transitioning to E back then. But anyway, I'm saying all that to say is I saw the product was there, but was not able to watch it until we made the move. And then, of course, meeting you. And so that formula, $40 a month is a lot because we talk about streaming services and all the options that are out there now. And you know, Netflix or Disney Plus, I think they've all kind of started jacking their prices up, but they're still about half of what $40 a month would have translated to.
Right.
And today in 2026, is that a concept you think would work to do a weekly where you're just buying that particular wrestling product? Because I don't know that that would work with the way things are structured today.
I don't think for $10 a week, when
Hmm.
like you said, I mean, originally we got channel 9.99,
Hmm.
and when you can get all that content for 10, even like right now, I think most prices are between 15 and $20.
Yeah.
So I don't think just getting a 2 or 3 hour weekly segment would for that price, or paying that each week would
Yeah.
work. Real quick, I just want to ask, were you living in Alabama in 2022 when TNA launched?
No, no, we
Okay.
moved. I moved to Indiana in '99, so uh,
Okay.
yeah, we were long gone. I think though, in all honesty, had we still been in Alabama, I would have gone because it was right there in Huntsville, which
So yeah, the
was
first show was in Huntsville. Yeah.
about an hour away from where I lived. In fact, when I did, and I've shared the video here before
Mm,
on the podcast, when I interviewed Bobby Heenan and Buff Bagwell and Goldberg and Ray Traylor, that was
mm,
at the Von Braun Civic Center in Huntsville.
mm.
So I had been over there a time or two, and so yeah, I think, and that's that. Sorry, you just opened up a whole new can of worms for me. When I lived in Alabama, there was here's part of my problem. I am very introverted, and until I get to know people, I stay that way. I don't typically, walk into a room of strangers and strike up a
Yeah.
conversation. That's just not me. Um, and so this is back in the days of AOL chat. And so I was chatting with this wrestling company in the area where I was living in Alabama. It was called MWA Millennium Wrestling Alliance because this is 1999, of course. So we're right on the edge of everything. And I had asked if they had anybody that if they needed any, because they were recording videos on a video recorder and then putting out VHSs back in the day. And so they said, yeah, you can run the camera. Well, the camera was just stationary, set up in the corner of this building, and I was on the edge of the ring. And so not a whole lot of movement there. And I literally, other than the owner and his wife, I didn't interact with anybody there. And again, this is that awkward, I'm mid 20s, just weird time, whatever. And so I'm saying all that to say is if I would have put myself out there more, uh, and then when TNA came around, and if I were
Mm.
still in the area, I would have definitely put myself into, getting into involved with that and working behind the scenes and doing things to try to help with that because I like kind of the backstage area, the nuts and bolts of the
Yeah.
stories and all that is very fascinating to me. So anyway, when you were when you first started watching, you said you saw the press release. Were you just checking out message boards, or how did you hear that? Because like we said, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook to alert people that something like this was on the horizon.
Yeah. I mean, by this time, I was well into the online wrestling news sites,
Hmm.
and there used to be onewrestling.com, which
Yeah,
is now pro wrestling. It moved into something else when some of the writers left and created their own. But the guy who ran One Wrestling was a guy named Bob Ryder,
yeah,
and he worked behind the scenes at TNA in the early days. And so obviously, One Wrestling is then promoting it,
yeah.
and that's where I heard about it
Okay.
mostly. So,
What
and
what?
yeah, and I actually sent them a letter trying to get, because at the time when I was working at the TV station with you, I was directing morning news, Monday through Wednesday, and I had Thursday and Friday off. And
Oh,
I'm
okay.
like, well, if you guys are doing shows Wednesday night, I can be in Nashville. And
Yeah,
again, this is being naive and not really understanding what time you have to show up to start setting up and everything. But
yeah.
it's like, I kind of reached out and asked if they needed anybody, and they never responded, shockingly. And then I remember going to a show with one of our coworkers,
Yeah.
and who was in school at the time, I think at SIU, and the ring announcer, not Jeremy Borash, but they had another ring announcer for like their dark matches and stuff,
Uh-huh.
who apparently was an SIU student.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know his name. I can think of it, but yeah, he's like, oh, I know that guy. And he's like, he's a dick, but yeah, it's wrestling. But I was going to say, speaking of that, when you went to Millennium Wrestling and you said you didn't interact with anybody,
Yeah.
uh, dude, that's not cool. You got to go around and introduce yourself and shake everybody's hands. Otherwise, if
I
Booker T would have been there, you would have been blackballed.
and here was part of it. I like I said, I was working at a TV station in Alabama, and literally would do. I anchored the 6 o'clock news, and then got off set at 6:30. The show started at 7, and it was like probably a 15-minute drive. So I mean, I was literally getting there, as the fans were filing in, and the show was getting ready to start, and so. I could have, in hindsight, stayed behind after the show
Mhm.
and talked. I never even I never set foot in the locker room. I literally went to my little station, if you will. It was up on a riser that was kind of parallel with the ring, and that's basically what I did. I didn't do a whole lot beyond that. I did do when, and here's another. You talk about being naive. I I auditioned, not auditioned. I applied for uh, the ring announcer job that Lillian Garcia ended up getting with WWE back in 1999, and I used footage from Millennial. Uh, is it Millennial? Millennial is the generation. Millennium Championship Wrestling. So
Yeah, and
anyway,
Willennium is.
yeah, I did a news story that day, and talked to some fans, and talked to the owner and his wife, who was also she wrestled and did some stuff there as well. But it's funny because they friended me on Facebook a few years ago. So I mean, I hadn't seen them in 25 years, and so then we reconnected on Facebook. But anyway, it stepping out of that comfort zone is something that I've just never really been too good at doing. And I didn't realize that you had asked the TNA folks. So when you're reading about the talent, and here's another thing about me is I love comfort. I love, you see the figures behind me. These are all, guys that I resonate with. And when I turn on wrestling, I wouldn't be opposed today if Stone Cold Steve Austin came stomping down the ramp or whatever the case is. So there's a lot of back then, especially because there was no AEW, and I don't know, Ring of Honor, I think might have been developing around the same time, but there wasn't a ton of uh, you know, other than seeing those ex-WWE names, there had to be a lot of talent on that roster that you maybe hadn't heard a whole lot about. You were on the message boards, obviously, and following some of the indie scene, but was there anyone that was a no name, and I hate using that word, but an unknown, I guess, at the time that turned into a big star as you were watching TNA and Ring of Honor as it came up as well?
Yeah, I think Ring of Honor launched 4 months prior to TNA's launch. I mean, the biggest name, and granted, he had been on like the last month or two of WCW,
Hmm.
is AJ Styles.
Yeah.
Um, he was in the first match, or yeah, I think he was in the first match on TNA. And, I think it was because I knew that Jerry Lynn, obviously ex ECW champion,
Yeah.
AJ Styles, low key, I'd probably seen in Ring of Honor or heard about in Ring of Honor. Um, and in that first match, the winning team were the Flying Elvises, Sonny
Mhm.
Siaki and two other guys, Jorge Estrada, and I can't remember if Jimmy Yang was the third one. I don't remember, but
Was.
to me, that plays into what I as YouTuber Simon Miller says, goofy wrestling for life, because then later on, like a year or two later, I would get into Chikara, which,
Yeah.
as we've discussed, is completely insane. at times. So I think I was more into the lesser knowns
Hmm.
than, because Ken Shamrock was your first NWA champion, your TNA champion, and I mean nothing against Shamrock, but I don't know, he just never struck me as the guy you built the company around. And then of
Hmm.
course you had Jarrett, who was all over, and I mean at least they made Around the Truth Killings a champion at a time. So gave him a shot, but then and then you bring in Dusty Rhodes and you have a midget masturbating in a trash can, baby. That's gonna sell it. You have a tag team called the Dicks or the Johnsons. I'm sorry, the Dicks were in WWE. Uh, but you have guys wearing flesh colored bodysuits and masks called the Johnsons. What more do you want?
So is it fair to say, did it start off more on a alternative to WWE, like a serious, not the Dicks or the
Yeah,
Johnsons or those kinds of things, or did they have, because the Flying Elvises obviously is a gimmick and more of that in
yeah.
sports entertainment, was it still appealing to WWE fans back in that time? And I've got another question I keep wanting to ask and we getting sidetracked. So I'm
Okay.
going to plant this seed now as well.
Okay.
TNA, as a guy in his
Name.
20s, you probably had a different connotation, but the whole premise was total nonstop action wrestling.
Yeah.
So did the name, what did you think of the name? Because it is kind of, 30 or 25 plus year or 20-ish years later, it's
Yeah.
still going strong. I know they deviated from it for a bit, but it still has its critics, I think, the
Yeah.
letters TNA.
Okay. So first question, I think this is where I go, said earlier that they were different than and less than
Hmm.
because they wanted to be different because they wanted to show off the X division. That
Yeah.
was a prime focus. And I think the main event of the second episode, second or third, was crowning the first X division champion. They also put a focus on tag team and had tag team title matches main event the show, which is something you didn't see that often in WWE. But I also think they tried to get that WWE audience with characters, gimmicks, focusing on the known
Hmm.
star. And now I'm going to go on another tangent. One of my criticisms of early TNA is, again, you go back, you're asking people to spend $10 on a product that they know nothing about,
Yeah.
possibly.
Sure.
I think they should have, and again, not knowing the business, not knowing logistics, if this would have been possible. But for 6 months, they should have set up a touring schedule and
Hmm.
every week go into a different city. I think it should have been Nashville, Memphis, um, somewhere in Kentucky, and Evansville, Indiana. You got a nice little loop. You could start to plant the seeds. You could get, and let people know, hey, we're launching weekly television in X amount of time.
Hmm.
Because I also think going only from Nashville was also a detriment to the success because they were giving away free tickets. And, if you have the chance to see something for free or pay, which I know you're going to most likely do.
Yeah.
Um, so I
And did they
think
pretty much keep it there in Nashville? They didn't go
no,
do it. I mean, I know they did a show in Huntsville, but they pretty much,
the first show was in Huntsville. And other than that, everything else was from the Nashville
yeah,
Fairgrounds.
that's a tough nut to crack, so to speak, if you're
Yeah.
doing a weekly like that where you're not getting out. Because, and I know people like you, and I'm sure there were others that drove, because you drove what, three
Yeah.
hours to go see the show from time to time, but still,
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
crazy.
And again, had I been working, if I had to work on Thursdays, I wouldn't have done it. But because
Hmm.
I got off at work at noon and could drive down and then come back in the same night. But so I was saying TNA early, you focus on Jeff Jarrett, Ken Shamrock, The Truth, Raven when he got released by, I think you're trying to lure people in with the names,
Yeah.
which, you know, and I think we've said it before, and it's a whole nother episode that we could do. I don't think names really move needles.
Hmm.
I think like right now, John Cena, The Rock, Roman Reigns could show up on AEW television this week, and it wouldn't do anything
Yeah.
because yes, wrestling WWE fans like those guys, but they're more WWE fans than wrestling fans per se. And so I don't think that they would necessarily follow to go again to find something new. They want what they know. And if John Cena and Roman Reigns want to prove me wrong and show up on AEW, then I would be interested to test that theory out, but I don't see that happening. Your other, what was your second
So
question? The name, the
TNA
name.
moniker, what
Yeah,
do you think of it then and now?
it's another reason why Vince Russo should never be allowed near a wrestling company. It's, I get it, and obviously early 2000s, we're still in that kind of American Pie
Hmm.
era of juvenile humor.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, if you try to explain to someone, oh, I'm going to go watch TNA, or TNA wrestling, they're not going to be like, oh, what's that? They're going to be like, what? Get away from me before I call the cops, and stay away from schools, you pervert. But
Well,
but
and then,
somehow, but I think because it's been around for 20 years, like it's got that. That's why they went back to it, other than Impact, because I think it now has a, I don't know, somewhat sentimental attachment.
yeah, that's you get into a whole litany of marketing advice, branding advice, and all
Mm-hmm.
that when you move away from because did you think 20, I'm trying to do math here. TNA started in 2002.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so 20, what,
Four
4 years
years.
ago now almost. Um, did you think, I mean, obviously I know you didn't think you'd be sitting on a podcast talking about this, but did you think, because we saw WCW go away, we saw UWF and AWA and ECW, all of these other companies fold, WWE stood strong.
Yeah.
Did you think TNA had a chance at surviving? And much less, I mean, it's got to be the second longest running wrestling company in the United States. I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess technically because Ring of Honor did kind of shut down for a year before Tony Khan bought it, and but again, I mean, Ring of Honor now is not what Ring of Honor was pre-pandemic.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, and if you read the message boards, like every year it was, oh, TNA is going out of business.
Right.
TNA is going to
Yeah.
go out, and I think they had a money mark owning the company who knew very little apparently about wrestling,
Are you talking about Dixie
but
Carter?
yes,
Okay.
um, so she could be uh, manipulated into saying, "Oh, we're going to bring in Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff, and we're going to be bigger than WWE. We're going to go head to head on Monday night because we're Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff." Again, going back to names don't move needles,
Hmm.
um, but somehow TNA has stuck around, and I think, especially you comparing TNA and Ring of Honor because they both came out at the same time, and they both had a very different uh, business philosophy. Really, TNA, like you said, was doing the weekly pay per view. Then they got a show on Fox Sports, and television seemed to be their you know mo. Whereas Ring of Honor was taking a lot more unknown talent
Mm.
and relying on the tape trading or tape buying business to get their name out there, and then eventually DVDs as well. And I think um, it's I like Ring of Honor, and obviously we went to the show the weekend of WrestleMania 22 and had a great time when uh, Samoa Joe and Necro Butcher tried to kill a kid next to us. Yeah, I got insulted, which you enjoyed. Um, and I'm sorry, are you picking up the airplane circle or the helicopter circling around?
I hear something, but it's not.
Okay, it's
It's
kind of
not.
annoying. I don't know what's going on outside, but I should probably stay inside for the time
Is
being.
your door locked?
Yes,
Okay.
I liked Ring of Honor, but I never felt like Ring of Honor was as good as it got people as people said it was. And this is something that I'll say AEW has this tendency to do as well. It's they don't focus on story. it's just if you take two guys that are really good at wrestling, or girls, women, I guess girls might be a little still derogatory term, but take two female wrestlers, two male wrestlers that are really good, and say, go have a match, and it's really good. Does that make you a good booker, or does that make you a good, you know? And I think, you know, I was trying to think last night while watching Collision, uh, because there was a Andrade was taking on Angelico, who I think has been on TV on Dynamite or Collision like maybe three times in the last year. And they said, you know, he's won 36 matches in his AEW career. And I'm like, he's been there for 6 years. That's like one win every 2 months.
Mm.
And I was trying to think of back in the day when we would get squash matches, you know, or enhancement matches. How much did the announcers really sell the opponent as a threat? You
Right.
know, was Rusty Brooks really going to beat Randy Savage? You know,
Right.
did Gorilla try to get that over? And I think, you know, that's a issue now where it's like you're kind of insulting my intelligence when you be like, oh, you know, and granted, maybe have some fluke wins so
Mhm.
that you could say, hey, anything can happen. But yeah, when you and it's like when Lance Archer and Rocky Romero come out, and he's like, "Oh, these are part of the Callis family, and they're threats." And it's like, again, they don't win matches; they're there to take the pin. I know that. Anyway, I'm rambling now.
Well,
My critical point about AEW that you wanted. So, but anyway, TNA, ROH. I I am thankful that TNA exists and that Jarrett tried to do something. Same way with Ring of Honor, and I think it didn't help the early 2000s because they weren't big enough. But I definitely think in after 2010, when these companies had made stars out of AJ, um, Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens, that had it not been for TNA and Ring of Honor, would these guys be in WWE right now?
and that's exactly what I was about to ask you is, Vince McMahon buys WCW in 2001 and fires Jeff Jarrett on air, kind of tongue in cheek, but it was turns out that was legit. Jeff Jarrett was not coming over when the company was bought. Imagine a scenario, a timeline where Jeff Jarrett is part of the invasion and goes to WWE. Does Jerry Jarrett try to start TNA with, you know, uh, Dutch Mantel or someone else? Or does TNA ever even become a thing? And then do we get to know AJ Styles? And I know Samoa Joe had been in Ring of Honor, but I associate him with TNA as well. Kurt Angle ends up going to TNA. Kurt Angle is one of WWE's top stars,
Mm-hmm.
and wrestled longer in TNA and probably sat at the top of that mountain
Uh,
much longer than he would have had he stayed in WWE. So when people talk about alternatives or competition or whatever phrase you want to use, I that's where I value companies like Ring of Honor or TNA or AEW having a place because I'm watching wrestling to support wrestling. The guys and
mm,
women who are in there doing that. And then for a while there, WWE had this chokehold where you were pretty much screwed if you got released or got hurt or,
yeah.
whatever the case was. But at least having another place to go, and sure, it may not be on par. You don't have the fanfare of a WrestleMania with or Monday Night Raw with the programming, but at least it's something that's keeping those men and women active because Buff Bagwell, I think, is a classic example. He was done probably by age, I don't know how old he was when the sale happened, but he was in his early 30s.
Mm,
Chris Jericho's 55, and everyone's chomping at the bit to find out where he's going next to continue
yeah.
wrestling. The Hardy Boys, those guys are pushing 50. John Cena just retired at 48. CM Punk is pushing 50. So there's a lot of life left for these guys. So I'm glad that there's those other places for them to go that may not be as glitzy and glamorous as WWE, but there are alternatives, if you will. And eventually TNA did start to travel. You and
Mm,
I lucked out. I shouldn't say lucked out. We had the opportunity to go to a baseball event here in Marion. Now you flew back in because you were already actually back in LA by
Mm.
this,
Yeah.
or living in LA at this point. So you flew back to Southern Illinois for this show.
Yeah.
Um, did you see a whole lot of other? I don't know how far out of because like we said, Nashville's about 3 hours from here. So I don't know how much they went outside of the South, Midwest, Southwest area, or Southeast area, pardon me. Did they ever make their way out to California? Did you watch TNA anywhere other than in Nashville or here in Southern Illinois?
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to rack my brain to. I think they came to LA once, maybe, but I know I was trying to think. I think the last TNA show that I went to was Bound for Glory 2013, I think, which was in Phoenix. And
Okay.
so I flew down to Phoenix. Yeah, I think I flew. And yeah, that was when they were doing the Aces and Eights storyline.
Is that when you met
And
Hulk Hogan and Brooke Hogan at
when I
the?
went, yeah, that was the first year they did the Hall of Fame and they inducted Sting. And so I got to sit at a table with Chavo Guerrero and not ask him if becoming an Eddie Guerrero tribute wrestler hurt his career at all. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to think. And I think TNA, they were just out here early. I think their last year January pay per view was here on the campus of USC. But yeah, I mean, they travel occasionally, but for the most part, I think they try to do their big shows outside of Nashville or outside of Orlando when they finally moved to the Impact Zone.
I don't know if they still do this, but I think one of my biggest compliments to TNA is the fan experience.
Mhm.
And you pay for it. Don't get me wrong. They're not rolling this out for free, but to me, it was worth the value because at that baseball event that we attended in Southern Illinois in 2011, I mean, we went backstage and I say backstage, we were on a baseball field behind the
Yeah.
inflatable TNA thing that they had set up. But, um, you know, we met AJ Styles, we met Matt Morgan, and, we stayed late and did the thing in the ring with Kurt Angle, and Jeff Jarrett was there. And, so they give you a lot of
Mhm.
value for that experience because I'd never seen WWE do anything like that other than like Access, and you're paying
Mhm.
uh, a multiple of what we paid for that TNA experience. But then it also felt those WWE experiences feel a bit more rushed. And with the TNA stuff, it was just kind of like everybody was backstage, or I keep
Yeah.
saying backstage, you know what I mean? And you're just kind of walking up and interacting and mixing and mingling
Mhm.
with these talents. You weren't waiting in line, so to speak, or anything like that. At least that's my memory of this. Are you remembering it like that too?
I think so. I remember meeting Matt Morgan and Eric Young and got our picture. We win the ring, got a picture with Angle. And I know I got AJ. We met AJ because I got him to sign some action figures.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't actually remember that interaction at all. But I was also thinking back to, I believe, I know I went to the 2 year anniversary show in Nashville. And I think I went to the 1 year anniversary as well. And after the show was over, they had like a little party celebration and you didn't have to pay extra and
Mm,
you're just hanging out and wrestlers would come by and um, you mingle talk and yeah, it wasn't like go through a line, get a quick autograph and move on. It was actually like, oh, hey, Eric Watts, what's going on? How's Cowboy Bill? What's going on? Do you think the Rams are going to be any good? Whatever you
yeah.
wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, and at Bound for Glory, I did pay. I probably paid extra for the access type event where they had guys and female wrestlers set up at different stations, and you could go around and get autographs, and that's when I got Dixie Carter to also sign the program. And then, like I said, at the Hall of Fame dinner, you were sitting at a table with each table had one wrestler
Hmm.
at the head of it. And unfortunately, you didn't know which table who was going to be at what table, and you didn't have assigned seating. It was just a free for all once you got in there to find a spot. So they could
So
have
did you
handled that a little
sit
bit
and
better.
then did you sit and then Chavo showed up at your table, or
Yeah,
was he already there?
yeah. You all sat, and then the wrestlers came in later. So,
Okay.
uh,
That probably
but
saved some egos doing it.
yeah, yeah,
People's piling on top of each other to sit at Sting's table, and then
yeah,
Chavo sitting there twiddling his thumbs. No
yeah.
offense.
No, but yeah, and I do think that is, I mean, with smaller companies, and I don't want sound disparaging to TNA, um, but with this, I think that's one of the benefits of going to
Yeah,
smaller wrestling shows, um, and yes, I mean, it would be great for if TNA could pay what WWE does or what AEW pays, and I don't know what their salaries are, um, but I think as a fan, that experience is better than, again, I guess it depends on what your fandom of, if like, oh, I got to meet, you know, Magnus and Brooke or Miss Tessmacher, who I did say that you said she was nice to eat or something like that, because we were doing the radio show at the same time, and you had made a comment, and she's like, okay, cool. But yeah, I guess it depends, is it better to meet I'm trying to put this politely, a non WrestleMania main eventer
hmm
and have 30 people there so you get actual interaction, or meet John Cena and have to stand in line for 4 hours and get 30 seconds,
right, right. Yeah, like I said, that meet and greet that we did at the
No.
baseball event to me was very memorable, and we've stood in line to meet some guys and women before. Um,
Do you remember
obviously,
that time we met Pac?
yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. So that event at Net with meeting Neville and was it Kalisto at
Yeah.
Toys R Us in Dallas, and Neville remembering meeting me from before. To me, that was worth the price of admission, which I don't think there was an admission for that, but the look on your face when you remembered who I was, to me was worth it. But anyway, yeah, I like again, I like the way that TNA did that. I don't know if they still do that or not. Um, years ago in 2018, and we've talked about this before too. I flew to Vegas and did the TNA tryout to be a ring announcer for the set of tapings that they were doing in Vegas at that time. Obviously, didn't make it through. You came in and you weren't there for any of the audition stuff, but it was just again that vibe and seeing D'Lo Brown because D'Lo had come in and I interviewed D'Lo on the set at the TV station that morning of the baseball event. So he remembered me from that experience, and um, Sanjay Dutt was there, and God, I feel like there was someone else, and just kind of getting to talk to those guys, and even though it was just for a few seconds or a few minutes in some cases, um, it was just one of those experiences that again I didn't make it, but I'm glad I did it. And again, it was one of those stepping out of the comfort zone things that if I didn't do it, I would have regretted it more than doing it and not making it. So, um, and you and I had been critical of TNA with the blog back when we were writing blogs on a regular basis and not really having a podcast at that point, but just kind of putting thoughts out in print form, if you will. When do you feel like you became, and when I say critical, I don't mean that in a negative way, but you were obviously committed to TNA, plunking down, nearly $500 a year to watch it on a weekly basis, whereas you could watch WWE programming just by paying your cable bill. So, talk to me about that side of it. When did you start to notice? Was it because WWF, obviously WWE, Vince McMahon, up until the TKO thing? So for all of our fandom, it has been one guy making the final call, so to speak. TNA has seen many iterations of that. So was it during those changes, those transitions that you became more critical because they tried to be more WWE light, or when do you feel like TNA changed for you in terms of your fandom of it?
I don't know the specific time frame. I would say it's probably somewhere when after 2 years, Shark Boy wasn't world champion. But no, and seriously, I think it became. I mean, definitely when Hogan and Bischoff came in 2010, um,
Hmm.
that because then it became, like it's like Bischoff for all the success he had with WCW, it was like he was still operating like it was 1997 or
Mm.
94, if you go back to the early days of Nitro, and not realizing that the television landscape had changed, wrestling fans had changed. Because you're talking, I mean, by that time, it's a whole generation of fans that has turned over for the most part, since WCW shut down.
Yeah.
So when on that first episode, when you come in and you bring in Hogan and Flair and the Nasty Boys and Val Venus, and it's like, no, we don't want the WWE wrestlers. We want TNA wrestlers, the ones that they've built up. And then you make AJ Styles into mini Nature Boy,
Hmm.
and like that's not Styles' character at all. Um, so that was definitely part of it. And I think one of my biggest issues with TNA booking, and this goes across now for all promotions, is if you have a championship match and you do a ref bump, to me that is the laziest form of match booking that there is. Because if you can't have a clear winner without either interference or cheating or whatever, why are you even having the match?
So now, let's fast forward to 2026, where the debut on AMC is
Mhm.
behind us. This is, again, visibility is important for any product, but especially the wrestling product. And whether it's on cable or streaming service, the indies Stride, when we were doing Stride during COVID, that's when we decided to start a YouTube channel. We had a YouTube channel, but we weren't doing our monthly shows on there. But anyway, saying all that to say is, uh, wrestling companies crave that visibility, and so seemingly they're going to get more of that. TNA is on AMC.
Mhm.
I know there's been mixed reaction, and I'm not going to dig deep into what your
Mhm.
thoughts are. I know they had some production issues and they had some other things that they could have done differently. Do you see TNA, because it has evolved many, many times, has it gone back at all to its original roots, do you think, with this new concept? Does it need to go back more to its original roots, or does it continue to flourish, or does it need to do something different to flourish and grow with a new audience or a potential new audience, being able to reach more
Yeah.
more fans?
I think the main thing would have to be, again, you have to have something that is different
Hmm.
to get, because again, when TNA, when Bischoff came in, or even when Dixie Carter took over and they brought in Russo and it became WWE light, for a better term.
Yeah.
Again, it's like, why do I want to watch a knockoff when I can watch the original?
Hmm.
Especially if at this time they're both on cable, same price. I'm not having to pay anything.
Sure. That makes sense.
But so, and that's where I think that's why Ring of Honor was more successful than TNA in terms of wrestling fandom.
Hmm.
Um, and I think why AEW was successful in the early days is because it did present something different and a different style, a different um, production look, whatever. To me right now, and again, as someone who had not watched a TNA episode in probably over a year and only kept up through the internet and what's going on, I my view is the partnership with WWE and NXT is more of a hindrance for TNA because I don't I don't know if TNA's ever looked strong against NXT. You had NXT people winning TNA championships.
Hmm.
I don't think I think there may have been one or two where briefly a TNA wrestler won an NXT title,
Hmm.
but Um, and they have the NXT invasion angle going on in TNA with guys that aren't top tier NXT talent, but they're getting one over on the top stars of TNA. So I think that needs to be worked out better to be either more even footing or give TNA the advantage and make them look credible. And especially when you have guys like Nick Namath, former Dolph Ziggler,
Mhm.
um, Elias, the Hardy Boy. You have guys that were in WWE and on a upper mid card level,
Yeah.
and now if they're being punked out by NXT guys that aren't the main champions, I don't know. For me, that doesn't work.
January 2027, TNA still under its own ownership, or is it a WWE developmental territory?
I mean, I think rumored to be right now, does WWE own part of TNA and no one knows it?
Hmm.
Um, I mean, allegedly, I think they've said that the partnership goes on for at least another 2 years.
Mhm.
So we'll see. But I think moving to AMC is probably the best television deal they've had since they were on Spike.
Mhm.
Um, just because apparently The Walking Dead is still very popular, and so people may tune in as long as they get good promotion on.
Mhm.
It's like when ECW got to deal with TNN, the Nashville network at the time, which
Yeah.
became Spike. And they would only promote ECW during ECW. And Paul Heyman said, like, why are you promoting it to the people that are already watching? I
Right.
know you want to get the people that aren't watching to be aware of it. And I said that was one of my complaints with this premiere episode was everybody that came out for a promo talked about TNA on AMC. And it's like, I know you're on AMC. I'm watching AMC. I'm watching your show. You don't have to hit me over the head 50 times in an hour to let me know that that's your show. Um, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. Unlike Chris Jericho, I do not think TNA is going to become the number two promotion in the next year. Um, and maybe that's the AEW mark in me and whatnot. But I think, again, based on that first episode, I would be curious how many people tuned in who hadn't watched TNA regularly or at all in the last 6 months. How many of them are going to come back next week or the week after that and keep watching? Because what I saw on that first show, and again, this is me. I don't care about the Hardy Boys anymore. I think, they've legends in the tag team wrestling. If you want to use them as kind of a mid-level, don't knock them down to Pedro Morales and Blackjack Lanza status as we talked about in private chat when we first got into wrestling. But I don't think they should be your tag team champions.
Mm.
I think they have a place, but that's not it. And there's just a lot of the best thing, the most, I guess, positive thing I can say is TNA looked like a local indie company in terms of what was going on in the ring. And with the talent that they have, I was expecting a little bit more.
Wait, you said that that was a positive?
I said that's the best positive I can give them is
Oh, okay.
they were not. If I was tuning in again, not familiar with TNA, but was a wrestling fan and
Mhm.
saw the roster that they had,
Mhm.
I would expect more than what I got.
Hmm. Okay.
And
It,
again, I've never directed wrestling, even though I've directed live television, much
mhm.
much simpler than what a wrestling show is.
Mhm.
But some of the production cues and stuff that I saw are things that, again, in hindsight, as an armchair quarterback, are easy to nitpick.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was not. I don't think it was the strong footing that they needed to set out on.
Things that were are hopefully fixable though, as far as the production stuff goes, and I think along the way the other things will come along. But again, as they say, you only get one chance to make a first impression. So I will continue to watch all wrestling on social media for sure. But again, I don't have AMC, and I'm not going to commit to another streaming service to get it on a weekly basis. But I'll continue to watch.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing that I will say. Because I don't have cable, I signed up again for the 7 day free AMC Plus trial to watch Impact. And the fact that the replay wasn't up for 20 hours,
Yeah,
that's to me is unacceptable in today's, you
right.
know, WWE events on Peacock, Collision and Dynamite on HBO Max are up, I think, within a half hour after they're over. So that if
Mm,
you miss it, you can watch it. But,
yeah,
or if you're even going to put it up 20 hours later, have something staying,
right.
you know, available at this
Right.
time.
Yeah. Meet
I,
consumers where they are, man. That's
yeah.
you got to do that in this day and age for sure. That's my marketing advice for the day. Chad, anything else before we put a bow on this week's episode?
Well, I'll get off the TNA and I'll give you my critical complaints for AEW that I told you about. Because as I was texting you my complaints about TNA, you asked me to be critical of AEW. Um, and the only thing I have, and these are minor things, and they're more semantics than anything, but the last 3 weeks on Dynamite, um, after like the first or second match, they're like, oh, we have a standby match. And they bring out Brody King and he has a 30-minute squash. And I'm like,
30 minutes.
30-second squash,
Okay.
sorry. Um, why is Brody King the only person who has standby matches? Why isn't he getting booked regularly? And how do you have a standby match in the middle of the show? To me, a standby match comes after everything you've promoted is over with and you still have time to fill.
Right.
Or if you say, okay, our first match is going to be, John Moxley versus Jack Perry, and a brawl breaks out, and that match never happens. And
Mm,
you're like, oh, well, we have to fill that time.
yeah.
So we've got this match, unannounced match. So yeah, I don't think, just say Brody King in action and do a 30-second squash. That's fine. You don't need a standby match. And then the other thing is, after watching Collision this week, is if you're not going to have anything important happen on Collision, that's fine, but don't expect people to watch. And also, if you're going to have stuff happen, promote it on Dynamite, because
Mm,
they'll tell you what happened on Dynamite on Collision, but on Dynamite, they, other than telling you what matches are going to be on Collision, they never say like, oh, this happened. Let's go back and see this highlight or whatever. And especially since you have wrestlers that are only on Collision, you're shortchanging them. So that's
I
my
don't know who said it first, but don't try to apply logic to an illogical situation. So
you can't fix stupid.
that is true. But you can fix the Royal Rumble contest. I don't know how else to turn into that. $5, folks. We're getting close. The Royal Rumble is less than 2 weeks away at this point, so be sure to check out the post on Facebook or DM the Facebook page, and we'll get you hooked up. $5 per entry, and we still we're not quite halfway filled on either Rumble. It's the men's and women's Rumbles that are going on. So proceeds. A portion of the proceeds go to the My 123 Cents Wrestling Figure Drive. The rest goes to the winner of the Rumble. So your number matches the winning number. You're going to walk out with a nice little chunk of change for just $5 investment. So check that out. Friends, thanks for listening.
Can
And
we, real quick, can we do prop bets too to see how far along we think the stadium will actually be? How much of the stadium will be completed by the Rumble?
there you go. We may have to. That's going to be interesting. When you said that last week, I didn't realize that it was literally like still being. I mean, shit. They may be. They talk about building the plane while you're flying it. That may be the case for the Rumble. So we'll check that out for sure as well. Friends, thanks for listening and or watching to this week's episode. We will see you next time.